I'm Alan, and on my channel Repetition and Contrast, I'm trying to provide tools for creative entrepreneurs. And in today's motion design tutorial, I want to just address some of the really basic fundamentals of motion. And I'm going to do it by creating two bouncing balls. One is going to be super light, and one is going to be super heavy. And this idea of animating the bouncing ball is like a classic exercise that all motion designers go through when they're first trying to figure things out. And I'm adding a couple of extra wrinkles to it. Specifically, I'm doing not only a ball that bounces, but a ball that's really heavy and therefore can't bounce. So a light ball and a heavy ball, and dealing with weight and how weight impacts our motions that we're designing is a big part of how we convey things effectively as motion designers. So here I am in After Effects. Again, I'm using After Effects as my main tool. You are free to do this in anything you want to. But After Effects is sort of the industry standard for motion design. There are all kinds of other tools out there that people are using, like Blender and Rive, and I love all that stuff. And eventually we'll start working in it, but I think starting in After Effects makes things easier to bounce into other programs. Okay, so on this composition, I'm just going to call this the bouncing ball. And I'm going to work at 4K as usual, and I'm going to make sure that my composition is set to something very short, like 10 seconds for my two different bouncing balls. And I'm going to hit OK. You may have noticed that I like working at 24 frames a second. I think that it looks more filmic, and I think it's generally better for animation. But feel free to work at 30 frames a second or 12 frames a second or whatever it is that you want to experiment with. We're going to talk in a future video about what all of our different frame rates mean in terms of how they affect or impact your final output. Okay, what I want to do though that I didn't do is I'm going to change this background to being something pretty close to white. And what I'm actually going to do now is make a shape that's going to be perceived as a ground plane. And on this ground plane, I'm going to make it, maybe I'll make it sort of groundy looking, like that. And then I'm going to begin with my first ball. I'm going to call this layer ground plane, and then I'm going to lock it, and I'm going to create a new layer, which is going to be a shape layer. And I'm going to click on my shape tool and go to the ellipse tool, and I'm going to create a ball, and I want this ball to be you know, pretty bright. And the goal here is for this ball to essentially drop and bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce like we would expect to see a ball do. And just like last time, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Transform and note that my ball is not, the anchor point for my ball is not centered in the ball. If I go to Contents, you may have noticed a second ago that if I'm in the contents of the shape layer, it looks as though it is, because there are in fact two different anchor points. What I want to do here while I'm in Contents, the ellipse one, is I want to change this to 0 and 0, so that now my ball is in the absolute center, and then I'm going to animate the layer instead of animating the ball. And I'm going to animate the layer by, rather than highlighting Contents, I'm going to highlight Transform, and now I can grab that ball and bring it over here. And I'm kind of aiming it at the third. While we're at this, we might as well learn a little bit about visual composition. And the little bit that I'm going to say about visual composition is that we like to put things on thirds of screens. I will talk more about this at length and at some point in the future, but not right now. I wonder So basically what I'm doing is, in my mind, I'm kind of dividing the screen into thirds in both directions, and sort of placing this ball at an approximate point where I think there's a third. There's a way to do that more precisely, but again, I'm not worried about it today because this is just an exercise, but I do want to start thinking about basic composition. And one of my basic composition things I want to be thinking about is putting my elements on the lines that would be these imaginary lines that represent the thirds of the screen. Okay. Just like last time, I'm going to give myself a position keyframe at 0 frames, and I'm also going to give myself a scale and rotation keyframe because of some other things I'm going to be doing along the way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump forward to about, let's see, what do I think? Maybe a half a second, and I'm going to bring this ball all the way down and touch the ground. And then I'm going to go forward another half a second. I'm going to bring the ball back up, not all the way. And I'm going to go forward about probably a little bit less than half of a second. And I'm going to bring the ball all the way back down to touch the ground. And I'm going to go forward, let's see, probably not quite a half a second. Bring the ball back up about halfway where it rose the last time. Go forward, not quite the length of the last transition, and go all the way down. Actually, I'm going to make that all the way. And then I'm going to go forward a little bit less than my last transition. I'm going to go up about halfway, and then I'm going to go up less than about the same amount of time as my last transition. Touch the ground. I'm going to go forward not nearly as much as my last transition, just barely bring the ball up a smidgen. Go forward about the same amount, touch the ground, go forward just a few frames, nudge it up, go forward just a few frames, nudge it down, and let's make that all happen before I do anything else. So if I watch this, the ball's going up and down as though it's bouncing, but it will not look like it's bouncing. Now, there are a bunch of reasons that this doesn't look like it's bouncing. The biggest reason is because, as we learned last week, there's an interpolation problem. Basically, whenever things move in nature, they start slow, they get faster, then they slow up as they're getting to a stopping point. In this particular case, because we have this bounce as an in-between step, like where it hits the ground, what we really want is slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, so on and so forth. Now, in order to accommodate that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to control click or right click if I'm on a PC, the position indicator, and I'm going to separate dimensions. And the specific dimension that I want to deal with right now is the Y position, the up and down value. And so I'm going to go to my grid, and I'm going to see that all of my lower points are the ones where the ball's in the air. So I'm going to select all of my lower points where the ball is in the air. Come on, there we go. And not the ones where it's touching the ground, and I'm going to easy ease those as a starting point. And I'm also going to easy ease that one because I missed it. Okay. So it's already better than it was, but not great yet. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to grab these Bezier handles for each one of the moments where it's in the air, and I'm going to lengthen, but try to keep it flat, the handle. And when I lengthen the handles here, what I want to do is I want to keep it flat. I want to keep the curve reasonably flat, like a classic parabola. For those of you who've been in math class. And as long as I do that every time, and as long as, oh, went too far. I'm just trying to shift this over so I can see this more clearly. I'm I'm also going to do a little bit of math in terms of how many frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I got 10 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I want these to, you know, the strike, in between the strikes, I want to have an even number of frames around my height. All right, so I'm backing up. Okay, so I'm doing that same thing again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's too many frames, so I'm going to back up 2 and slide this guy over because I want to have fewer frames for every bounce. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think I got that right. And now I'm going to extend my Bezier handles, but try to keep them approximately even on both sides. And so this one should be about 8 or 7 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm going to move it over. Again, I'm going to extend this on either side. One, 2, 3, 4, probably. 1, 2, 3, 4, good. I even want it to dribble a little bit here at the very end, but for right now I think that's probably going to be fine. Let's check it out. Okay, cool. I'm gonna do one more, I think. So let's do 1, 2, 3. Give myself just a smidgen of a jump up, and then 1, 2, 3. It's going to come back down and touch the ground. And then this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually over the next several frames, I'm going to have the ball shrink and move to the side just a little bit. And what that'll do, actually, let me back up here. On that frame, I want to add a keyframe for scale. And then as we get towards the end, I'm going to change the scale to be very small. And I'm going to shift it in terms of both X position and Y position as it appears to sort of roll off the edge of the plane. Okay, so most of that's working. There are a couple things that I still want to fix about it, having to do with this this idea in animation called squash and stretch. And the idea behind squash and stretch is pretty simple. When we see things in motion, even though they might not physically be squashing and stretching, if we squash and stretch them in animation, it'll look more real, because what happens is there's like a distortion in our eyes when we see something moving, where it appears to squash and stretch just a little bit because of the motions that are happening. And if we don't do that in animation, it tends to look more fake. So what's interesting is we're actually making something unnatural with the animation in order to make the thing look more natural in the end. So what I want to do is I want this thing to begin to stretch about halfway down its motion. And so there's about the halfway point of its motion. So I'm going to give myself an additional scale keyframe right here, because I want the scale to stay the same between here and here. And then what I want to do is I want it to, as it approaches this moment, the frame right before that moment, what I want is for it to appear to elongate just a little bit. Whoop, wrong one. I want to unlink my scale sides. There we go. And I want it to appear to stretch just a little bit as it's aimed for the ground. And then as it hits the ground, what I want it to do is I want it to squash just a little bit. And then as it heads back up, what I just did was I copied this keyframe. I'm going to paste it on the frame after the squash so that it stretches again. And then I want it to be back to round about halfway up its path again. Okay, so I'm going to take that entire sequence and copy it and paste it so that the stretch, the squash, whoops, I put it in the wrong place, so that the squash happens as the ball is impacting next time. And I was just guesstimating where it went, so I'm going to slide these over so that the middle point is where we should be squashing. All right, and then I'm going to slide over again. Ooh, these two don't match. Where did that go? It goes here. No, it was Y position, so it's the X that's off, right? Cool. Now, because this is getting shorter as we go, I'm going to move these frames in just a little bit every time. And as we get closer here, it doesn't need to squash and stretch as much because we don't see as much motion, and so therefore the squashing and stretching isn't going to be as pronounced. And in fact, as a result of that, when we get here, I'm going to lessen it from being 115 to being like 107. Do the same thing on the other side. And where it's actually squashing, I'm going to change that from being 117 to, again, about 108 or so. And then I don't think I need squash and stretch for the rest of this. Okay, so now let's see what it looks like. All right, so for our light ball, I think that works pretty well for the purposes of an exercise. And so I'm going to rename that layer ball 1. All right, so I'm going to lock that guy so I don't mess it up. And now I'm going to create a new layer. And this layer is going to be called ball 02. It's also going to be a shape layer. Rename ball 02. You know what, I'm going to unlock this real fast and just grab the contents ellipse 1. I'm going to copy it, put it on ball 2 and paste it and relock this layer. And I'm just so I didn't have to go through, you know, drawing it. And I kind of wanted it to look similar to my first ball as well. And so therefore I don't have to worry about resizing and all that mess. But I do want to recolor it. We had an orange thing going on for the previous ball, so I'm going to turn this one just a little bit red for the sake of us being able to differentiate them quickly and easily. I'm going to go to my, what's this thing called, selection tool, and basically put it over on the other third. And now what I'm going to do with it is I'm not going to have this ball appear until my first ball is pretty much, you know, rolling off out of the way. And so now my second ball will appear, and what's going to happen with it is I'm going to let it dangle in the air for just a moment, and then I'm going to hit my position, scale, and rotation keyframes, and I'm going to go forward almost a second, but probably just a little bit less than a second. Let's see here. That is on frame 5, so let's go to frame 20-ish. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, when I moved it, I did the cardinal sin. When I moved the ball, I moved it while I had contents highlight, and therefore my anchor point didn't go with it. So glad I noticed that before I started animating. All right, awesome. All right, so the 6 second mark, position, scale, rotation. I'm going to go forward about 20 frames. And then I'm going to let this thing come down, hit the ground. I'm going to go forward about 2 frames, 2-3 frames, have it bounce up just a smidgen, go forward a couple frames, have it hit the ground. As it comes up, pardon me, as it goes down, once it gets to about right here or so, I'm going to stretch it. And as it impacts the ground, I'm going to squash it. And then I'm going to go almost entirely back to its natural state without doing too much more squash and stretch. On my position keyframes, I'm going to separate dimensions. I'm going to go to the Y position, look at that grid mode. On the moments that are in the air, which are just these 2 keyframes, I'm going to easy ease them, and then I'm going to make this one very, very dramatic in terms of how long it stays in the air versus how fast it ends up going down. And I think I might just leave that one in place as easy eased. All right, and now what I'm going to do is, as we get towards the end, I'm going to have this ball roll towards us. So I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it go larger. So let's go to, say, about 400% and 400%. Keep it on the ground plane, moving towards us. So let's see what that looks like. Don't like that. Let's look at the keyframes here. I'm going to grab this guy and paste it again just so that it sort of sits there for a moment before it starts rolling our way. All right, so I did something wrong with this one. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I see. Hits, comes back up, comes back down. Let me zoom way in on this so I can really see what's happening. I'm hitting spacebar so that I can use the hand tool to move around. What's wrong is that we didn't quite hit that ground plane correctly. Okay. Now let's fit and take a look at the whole thing. I think it still needs to linger for a minute before it starts rolling towards us. It's still moving too fast. Oh, it's because it's idiot. I didn't copy the. Okay, I didn't copy the scale keyframe. Everyone at home knew I did that wrong, and they were just yelling at me. All right, now I got to make sure positions are correct throughout. I think we stretched too much too. I think it waits too long now. All right, I think we finally got it all working. I think I also need to ease the scale issue because it's representative of motion and it's moving out towards me too linearly. Now I just created another problem where it's moving up before it moves back down. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to easy ease the scale components, and I think that'll solve it. Or position components, I'm sorry. And it did. So now let's watch that one more time. Okay, there's one more design issue that I'm using right now that I want to make sure that you're aware of in part of the decision making for creating this is things are going down, so things are coming up. That's why it bounces, right? Also, something's moving away, so something else is moving towards us. Good motion design always has this counterpoint to it, where if something's going in one direction, something else is going in the opposite direction. And we need to be thinking about that as we design our motion projects. But hopefully this gave you a good sense of what one needs to do in order to make something seem light and how to make something else seem heavy. And we'll continue these ideas about how to think about basic motions as we look at motions in the future.